She charged me $500 a month to see my own granddaughter. And the thing is, she didn't even have the decency to ask me herself. She had my son do it, sitting across from me at a Waffle House off I-85 with his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee he never drank, reciting words I could tell he'd rehearsed in the car on the way over. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from where it actually began. My name is Richard Calloway. I'm 58 years old. I spent 33 years working as an electrical foreman for Duke Energy out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and I retired 2 years early because my wife June got sick, ovarian cancer. She fought it for 14 months, and she fought it the way she did everything else in her life, quietly, without complaint, and with more dignity than most people manage on their best day. She passed 3.5 years ago in the bedroom we'd shared for 31 years, with me holding one hand and our son, Nathan, holding the other. June was the kind of woman who kept a garden even when she didn't have the energy to walk to it. She'd sit at the kitchen window and tell me which tomatoes needed picking and which ones had another day left in them, and she was never wrong. She remembered the names of every kid on our street. She made chess pie from a recipe her grandmother wrote on the back of a church bulletin in 1962. She loved Nathan more than she loved breathing, and when his daughter Lily was born, June held her for the first time and said, "Well, there she is. There's the reason I'm still here." Lily was 11 months old when June died. She never got to hear Lily say her first word, which was more, and she never got to see Lily take her first steps, which happened on a Tuesday afternoon in the hallway of Nathan's house in Raleigh, while I was sitting on the floor clapping like an idiot. I recorded it on my phone. I still watch it sometimes. You can hear me laughing in the background, and it sounds strange to me now because I don't think I've laughed quite like that since. After June passed, I tried to do what I thought she would have wanted. I tried to stay present. I drove the 2 hours from Charlotte to Raleigh every Sunday. I brought Lily little things, a stuffed rabbit, a book about farm animals, a pack of those yogurt melts she liked. I called ahead. I never showed up uninvited. I kept my opinions about Nathan's marriage to myself, which, if you knew me, you'd know was not easy. Nathan married Brooke when he was 30. She was 27, an office manager at a dental practice in Cary. She was precise, organized, the kind of woman who color-coded her calendar and wiped down the kitchen counters 3 times a day. I didn't dislike her. I want to be clear about that. But there was always something about the way she looked at our family, at June, at me, like she was calculating. Not in a cruel way, exactly. More like she was always running numbers in her head that the rest of us couldn't see. When Nathan and Brooke bought their house, a 3-bedroom ranch in a new development off Capitol Boulevard, I gave them $85,000. That was the money June and I had saved over 20 years, plus a portion of my retirement account I cashed out early and paid the penalty on. June and I had talked about it before she got sick. We always said the money was for Nathan, for his family. I wrote a check, handed it to my son in my kitchen, and told him to use it however he needed. I didn't ask for a receipt. I didn't draw up a contract. He was my son. The money was a gift. That's what family does. What I didn't know, and what I wouldn't find out for almost 3 years, was that Brooke didn't see it that way. To Brooke, $85,000 wasn't a gift from a father to his son. It was leverage. And she spent the next 3 years using it. The changes started about 6 months after June died. Small things at first. Brooke mentioned that Sunday visits were hard because it disrupted Lily's nap schedule. Could I come on Saturdays instead? I said sure. Then Saturdays became every other Saturday. Then every other Saturday became when it works for us, we'll let you know. I went from seeing my granddaughter every week to once a month, sometimes less, and every time I asked about it, Nathan gave me the same answer. Brooke just wants things to be structured. You know how she is. I did know how she was. What I was starting to understand was that Nathan had stopped questioning whether what Brooke wanted was reasonable. The food restrictions came next. I used to bring Lily little snacks, animal crackers, those squeezable applesauce pouches. Brooke told me to stop because Lily had sensitivities that I wasn't equipped to manage. I asked what sensitivities. Brooke said it was complicated and that I should just trust her judgment. I stopped bringing food. Then I was asked not to take Lily outside in the backyard without Brooke present because Lily wasn't used to unstructured outdoor time. I want you to sit with that sentence for a moment. A 3-year-old who wasn't used to unstructured outdoor time? That's what I was dealing with. One Saturday, I drove 2 hours from Charlotte, pulled into the driveway, and Brooke met me at the front door with a smile that didn't touch her eyes and told me it wasn't a good day. Lily had been fussy. The house was a mess. Maybe next time. I stood on the porch for 3 minutes, nodded, got back in my truck, and drove 2 hours home. I pulled into my garage and sat there in the dark for a while. I thought about June sitting at the kitchen window, telling me which tomatoes were ready. I thought about what she'd say if she could see me, a grown man sitting in his truck in the dark, because his daughter-in-law had turned him away from his own granddaughter's door. She'd have said something. June wouldn't have sat with it the way I was sitting with it, but June was braver than me in a lot of ways. The document arrived in my email on a Thursday evening. No phone call, no conversation first. Just a PDF attachment from Brooke's personal email with the subject line Family Coordination Plan. I opened it on my laptop at the kitchen table. It was 4 pages long, formatted with headers and bullet points, printed on what I later learned was letterhead from a template she'd found online. It outlined the conditions under which I would be permitted to spend time with Lily. Visits by appointment only, Saturdays between 1 and 3 p.m., subject to cancellation with 24 hours notice. No bringing gifts without prior written approval. No discussing finances, home improvements, or personal matters with Nathan during visits. No posting photographs of Lily on any social media platform. No taking Lily off the property without 30 days written notice and a signed release. And at the bottom of the 4th page, a signature line, for me, with my printed name already filled in, like a contract waiting to be executed. I read it twice. Then I closed my laptop and went to bed. I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling fan. The one June always said wobbled too much. The one I never fixed, because she said it so often it became a joke between us, and I thought about what kind of person sends their father-in-law a document like that and expects him to sign it. I didn't sign it. I called Nathan the next morning and asked if we could meet somewhere to talk. He suggested the Waffle House off I-85, halfway between Charlotte and Raleigh. Neutral ground. I remember thinking that my son and I now needed neutral ground to have a conversation, and how that fact alone told me more than anything Brooke had put in her document. He was already sitting in a booth when I got there. He had that look, the one I'd been seeing more and more over the past year, careful, measured, like a man who has been briefed on what to say, and is trying very hard not to deviate from the script. Brooke feels like the current arrangement isn't working, he said. I asked him what arrangement. I'd followed every rule she'd given me. I'd called ahead, kept my distance, swallowed every instinct I had as a father and a grandfather. He talked for a while about Brooke's need for boundaries, about how the visits created stress in the household, about how Lily needed consistency. I let him talk. Then I asked him the question I'd been carrying around for months. Nathan, do you want me in Lily's life? He said yes. He said, of course. But there's always a but. The but was this. Brooke had decided that if I wanted to maintain what she called regular structured access to Lily, it was reasonable for me to contribute to Lily's monthly expenses. Not as a gift. Not when I felt generous. A standing monthly payment of $500 transferred to an account Brooke controlled as a condition of continued visits with my granddaughter. She calls it a family support contribution, Nathan said, not quite looking at me. I looked at my coffee. I looked at my son. He was 34 years old. He was sitting across from his father in a Waffle House explaining that seeing his daughter now came with a monthly invoice. I looked at the parking lot through the window. A woman was loading groceries into her trunk. The sun was hitting the windshields and making everything bright and hard to look at. I told him I needed some time to think. He nodded like that was a perfectly reasonable response, like we'd just discussed the terms of a car lease. I drove home in silence. Not the kind of silence that's peaceful. The kind that's full of things you haven't said yet because you're not sure you can say them without breaking something. That night, I sat at the kitchen table where June and I used to have our coffee every morning. I looked at the photo on the windowsill, the one of June holding Lily in the hospital the day she was born, both of them wrapped in a white blanket, June's face the happiest I'd ever seen it. 11 months before she died. I thought about what Brooke was asking me to do. I thought about $85,000 going into a house where I now needed written permission to sit on the couch. And then I thought about something my neighbor Hank had told me 6 months earlier. Hank's daughter had gone through a custody dispute, a bad one, and he'd mentioned a lawyer, a family attorney in Charlotte named Douglas Whitfield. Hank described him as thorough, patient, and the kind of man who doesn't raise his voice because he doesn't need to. I'd taken Douglas's card at the time to be polite. It was in the drawer next to the phone book and the spare house keys. I found it that night. I called Douglas Whitfield the next morning. His assistant put me through within the hour, and I spent 40 minutes on the phone explaining everything as clearly as I could. Douglas listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a pause, and then he said, "Mr. Calloway, I want you to do a few things before we talk again. I want you to save every email, every text message, and every document your daughter-in-law has sent you. I want you to write down every visit that was canceled or restricted, with dates. And I want you to talk to whoever handled the $85,000 about how it was transferred and whether any of it was documented as a gift." I asked him why that mattered. "Because," he said, "money given to a family member without documentation exists in a gray area. Depending on how it was given and what happened to it afterward, there may be options you haven't considered." My accountant was a woman named Denise Park. She'd done my taxes for 19 years. She was Korean American, a second-generation immigrant who'd put herself through Wake Forest, and she kept records the way a surgeon keeps instruments, everything labeled, sterilized, in its exact right place. I called her the same afternoon and told her what had happened. I asked her to pull everything related to the $85,000, bank records, transfer confirmations, any paper trail. What Denise found is what changed everything. The $85,000 I'd given Nathan and Brooke for the house hadn't all gone where I thought it went. Denise, working with Douglas, was able to trace the flow of funds from my account into Nathan and Brooke's joint account. The initial transfer was clean, all $85,000 deposited within a week of my writing the check. But over the following 18 months, a series of smaller transfers had been made from the joint account into a separate account held solely in Brooke's name. The transfers were small, $1,000 here, $1,500 there, spread out over time in a way that wouldn't attract attention. The total was just over $28,000. Now, I want to be clear about something. Denise didn't hack into anyone's bank account. What happened was that Douglas filed a formal inquiry as part of exploring my legal options. Under North Carolina law, when a substantial financial gift is given within a family and there's a subsequent dispute about access to a minor child, the court can require financial disclosure. Douglas had the standing to request it, and once the process was initiated, the records told the story themselves. Nathan didn't know about the account. I was almost certain of that. The way the transfers had been structured, small amounts, irregular timing, routed through the joint account first, it had the signature of someone who understood that the best way to hide something is to move it slowly. I sat in Denise's office for a long time after she showed me the numbers. I thought about Nathan's face at the Waffle House, that rehearsed expression. I thought about how much of what he'd been saying to me was Brooke's script and how much of it he actually believed. I wondered if some part of him suspected something was wrong but didn't have the words for it yet, or didn't want to. Douglas and Denise worked together over the next 5 weeks. I didn't say a word to Nathan or Brooke. I kept doing what I'd been doing. I called ahead. I showed up on Saturdays when I was permitted. I sat on their gray microfiber sofa and watched Lily stack blocks and draw pictures of dogs that looked like potatoes. And I told her about the cardinals that came to the feeder on my back porch every morning. She asked me once during that period if I was coming to her birthday party. It was still 2 months away. I said I hoped so. She said, "Mommy says maybe." And then she went back to drawing her potato dogs like that was a perfectly normal thing for a 4-year-old to say about whether her grandfather would be at her birthday party. I kept my face still. But that one landed somewhere deep. In the 6th week, Douglas told me we were ready. He had drafted 2 documents. The first was a legal letter, addressed to Nathan, outlining the $85,000 gift, the subsequent transfers into Brooke's separate account, and a formal request for full financial disclosure and repayment of the redirected funds. The letter was written not as an accusation but as a factual accounting, backed by bank records and transfer dates, requesting that the matter be addressed before any legal action became necessary. The second document was a petition, asserting my rights as a grandparent, under North Carolina General Statute 50-13.2, which allows grandparents to file for visitation when a substantial relationship with the child exists and access has been unreasonably restricted. Douglas had included a timeline of every canceled visit, every changed rule, every condition Brooke had imposed, presented as evidence of a pattern of systematic restriction. Both documents were precise. Neither was angry. They were simply very, very clear. Denise had also prepared a financial summary. Every transfer, every date, the account in Brooke's name, the amounts, the timeline, all of it laid out in clean columns. The kind of document that doesn't need interpretation because the numbers speak for themselves. I put everything in a manila envelope. I drove to Raleigh on a Saturday. I didn't call ahead this time. Brooke answered the door. She was wearing yoga pants and a cardigan, and that particular smile she reserved for my visits, polite and distant, the smile of a woman who has already decided how long you're staying. Lily was in the living room. I could hear her singing to herself, some song from a cartoon I didn't recognize, slightly off-key and completely wonderful. I said I had something for Nathan. Brooke started to say this wasn't a great time. Nathan was out back doing yard work. I could come in and wait, or maybe I could come back next. I said it would only take a moment, and I asked her to get him. Something in my voice, I think. Something that was calm in a way that didn't invite negotiation. She looked at me for a beat longer than usual, then turned and went to get him. Nathan came to the door in a t-shirt and work gloves, bits of mulch on his jeans. He saw the envelope in my hand. I watched something shift behind his eyes, not understanding yet, but something. I handed it to him. He pulled off his gloves and opened it, standing right there in the doorway, Brooke at his shoulder. He read the first page. I watched his face change, confusion at first. Then he turned to the second page. The financial summary. His eyes moved down the columns, the dates, the amounts, the account number he'd never seen before. He read it again. Then he looked up at me. "Dad, what is this?" "It's a letter from my attorney," I said, "and a financial report from my accountant. I think you should read both carefully, and then I think you and Brooke need to have a conversation." He looked at her. She looked at the envelope. "I don't know what he's trying to," she started. "Brooke," I said, quietly, "the account is documented. The transfers are documented. All $28,000. She stopped talking. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. It was the first time in 4 years I'd seen her run out of words. Nathan stood there reading for a long time. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. The documents said what needed to be said, and they said it in a language Brooke understood better than anyone. Numbers, dates, and legal terms. The language of transactions, which is the language she had been using on me for 3 years. Lily appeared at Nathan's side, slipping under his arm the way kids do, all elbows and complete confidence. She looked up at me with June's brown eyes. "Hi, Grandpa Rich," she said. "Hi, sweetheart," I said. Nathan looked at me over Lily's head. His expression was something I've never been able to put a single word to. Embarrassment and betrayal and relief all at once. The face of a man who has just been handed the answer to a question he'd been afraid to ask. "Come inside, Dad," he said. We sat at their kitchen table for 2.5 hours. Lily played in the living room, singing her off-key cartoon songs, occasionally wandering in to show us a drawing or ask for a juice box. Brooke tried at first to explain the transfers. "College fund for Lily," she said. Then household management. Then an emergency savings account she'd been meaning to tell Nathan about. But the documentation was thorough, and the timeline was clear, and at a certain point, she just stopped talking and stared at the table. That's what happens when a person reaches the end of their story and realizes there's no new version left to tell. Nathan called Douglas himself the following Monday, not as an adversary, as a man who wanted to understand what had happened to his family and what his options were. There were a lot of conversations after that, some I was part of, and many I wasn't. I don't want to tell Nathan's story for him. That's his life, and he gets to decide how it goes. What I can tell you is that 7 months later, Nathan and Brooke were separated. He kept the house. Brooke moved to an apartment in Durham near her sister. The $28,000 was addressed as part of the separation agreement, though about $6,000 of it was categorized as shared household expenses and written off. Douglas told me pursuing it further wasn't worth the cost or the conflict, and I agreed. Some losses are just the price of learning something you needed to know. And every Saturday morning now, I drive to Raleigh and pick up Lily at 9 o'clock. We go to the farmer's market on Oberlin Road, the one with the woman who sells kettle corn and the old man who plays banjo near the entrance. Lily holds my hand and points at everything and asks questions I don't always know the answers to, and that's fine because the questions are the point. She likes the goats at the petting area. She calls them the screaming dogs because the first time she heard one bleat she thought it was a dog having a tantrum, and I never corrected her because it's funnier that way and because June would have loved it. What I want to say to anyone watching this, anyone sitting in a quiet house recognizing something in this story, is that what happened to me has a name. It's called financial control, and it's one of the most effective tools in the isolation playbook. It works because it's quiet. It doesn't look like abuse from the outside. It looks like structure. It looks like organization. It looks like someone who just wants things to run smoothly. And the person on the receiving end, if they're the kind of person who values peace, who trusts the people they love, who believes that family means something, That person will absorb an enormous amount of unfairness before they recognize what's being done to them. I'm not a confrontational man. I spent my career reading wiring diagrams and making sure things that needed to carry a load could carry a load. I don't rush, I don't escalate unless I have to. But there is a difference between keeping the peace and accepting terms that were never fair. Grandparents have rights, not in a sentimental way. Legally. In North Carolina, under General Statute 50 to 13.2, grandparents can petition the court for visitation when a substantial relationship exists and access is being unreasonably denied. I didn't know that before I met Douglas. I'm telling you now because maybe you don't know it either. And money given to family should be documented. Not because you don't trust them, because documentation protects everyone. It protects the relationship when things are good. It protects you if things change. A simple letter stating the amount, the purpose, and whether it's a gift or a loan is enough. I learned that the hard way, at $85,000 worth of hard way. If you're watching someone you love being quietly pushed to the edges of their own family, a mother being managed out, a father being kept at arm's length, a grandparent following a laminated rulebook just to sit on a sofa for 2 hours, say something, not in a way that makes it worse. But say something. Because the person being pushed out usually can't see it clearly from inside. They're too busy following the rules, trying to keep the peace, trying to be reasonable, trying not to lose what little access they have left. They need someone on the outside to say, "This isn't right." Last week, Lily brought home a painting from preschool. It was supposed to be a family portrait. She'd painted 3 people standing in front of a brown rectangle that I think was a house. She pointed at the tallest figure and said that was me. She pointed at the medium one and said that was Daddy, and the smallest one was her. She said she put me first because I'm the tallest. I put that painting on my refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a cardinal, and I stood there looking at it for longer than a grown man probably should. And I thought about June at the kitchen window, telling me which tomatoes were ready, and I thought about how she would have taken that painting and framed it and hung it in the hallway and shown it to every single person who walked through our front door. She would have been absolutely impossible about it. She would have called her sister in Asheville, just to describe it over the phone. I like to think she saw it. If this story meant something to you, or if it reminded you of someone you know, share it. Not for me. For the person out there sitting in their truck in the dark, wondering if they're the unreasonable one. They're not.